Hey, it's Liz DiAlto, and this is the Untamed the Wild Soul Woman podcast. From body image, sex, spirituality, money and relationships, to motherhood, creativity, business, communication, and desire, Untamed the Wild Soul Woman is the place to come for real stories and powerful advice to help you reclaim and redefine womanhood in the 21st century. Liz DiAlto here, creator of Wild Soul Movement and your host for the Untamed the Wild Soul Woman podcast. If you are watching on the video, you can see that I'm outside today. If you can't see that, just be forewarned. Maybe there will be a little bit of background noise, but it's such a beautiful day. The idea of sitting in the house to record was a little bit unbearable to me. So here we are, and today's topic I've actually broken down into 3 separate Ask Liz episodes. It's a topic that came up in the free private Facebook group, The Soul Movement Salon. Almost 2 months ago now, I actually was going to do a webinar on this topic and decided instead to do it as a podcast episode. And because my intention with these Ask Liz episodes is really for them to be shorter, like 15 to 20 minutes max, and I've been running over a little bit on some of them, I decided to break this into 3 separate chunks. So on the topic of how to be more feminine, the reason it came up in the Facebook group is because I had been in another group, a more business-oriented group, and a woman had posted something about how to be more feminine, and a lot of people chimed in on, well, like, I wear lipstick or I'll dress up, and there were a lot of really physical things to it. And it just sparked a conversation around what does being feminine really mean to us as individuals. And I wanted to address this on the podcast because, I mean, this is really one of the core reasons for the podcast, for the whole reason for my work of reclaiming and redefining womanhood for the 21st century, because I think so many of us judge ourselves or feel inadequate or have a lot of misconceptions about what it means to be feminine or what it means to be a woman or how that's supposed to look or feel. So for this first part of 3 parts, I want to dive into what feminine actually means to you and how you might possibly be misconceiving, what that means. And I'll share my personal story because perhaps it'll relate for you. But for many, many years, I judged myself that I wasn't very feminine because what I really just thought feminine meant was prissy and girly or like dainty and light or delicate. And I've just never been that way. I grew up a total tomboy, playing sports, running around with the boys. In 2nd grade, I decided I never wanted to wear skirts again, and I didn't wear another one till like the 8th grade. So 6 years of not wearing skirts ever and mostly living in sports bras, jerseys, t-shirts, and stuff like that. And so a couple of years ago, as I started to study more of the divine aspects of masculine and feminine and actually understand the differences between feminine and masculine energy, one of the things that I stumbled into was the study of feminine archetypes. And I first discovered it through Clarissa Pinkola Estes' book, Women Who Run with the Wolves, which primarily focuses on the wild woman archetype, which those of you who have been listeners or have any familiarity with Wild Soul Movement know that that is largely now my comfort zone. But then also I started a book called Awakening Shakti by Sally Kempton. And in that book, she describes and gives practices and meditations and mantras for 9 different Hindu goddesses of yoga. And what was so interesting, I'd never really studied that before, was to see all the different expressions and ways to express the feminine. So when I came to the chapter about the goddess Durga, who has 8 different arms, and she is really a warrior goddess for the most part, but the 8 different arms represent different skill sets or different tools or different parts of herself that she might call on, depending on what the situation might need. For the first time ever, I felt myself really connecting to a feminine energy and really being able to identify myself as feminine, but in the context of this archetype. And so over the last couple of years, I've studied more on feminine archetypes and different type of goddess energies and things like that, not to necessarily worship the deity of it, but to just see what are all the different ways the feminine shows up and the feminine is expressed in me and through me or in myself and in my clients. And so many women have been set free by this concept of figuring out what are the various expressions of their feminine and when it's appropriate to use which one, but also to have full permission to not have it look traditionally, like what we perhaps might have always thought. And one of the things Clarissa Pinkola Estes talks about is how, traditionally in our culture, in our society, the two main archetypes that are perhaps most revered or perhaps most acceptable, socially acceptable or otherwise, are the mother and the maiden. And there's just so many shades of feminine in between there that those resources are something I highly recommend. So that's the first thing, is how is your feminine expressed? And if perhaps you've judged yourself in the past because you might have someone in your life who you've idealized as what feminine needs to be or what it should look like, and you don't match up to that, whether it's physically, maybe you don't think you look a certain way, or maybe you don't feel a certain way, or maybe it's that, you've never wanted kids and you've judged yourself that you don't have a maternal instinct, or maybe you don't like to cook or clean your own house, or maybe you're a badass in your job or your career or your business or something. All of that could possibly be exactly the way that you express your feminine energy. So I definitely encourage you to, get your hands on some books or check out some of those goddesses, or really just begin to delve into the possibility that the way you express your feminine energy is unique, and it may not look the way anyone else's looks. So give yourself permission to explore there. Also, I always like to caution people whenever the word should comes up. Whenever you find yourself feeling like you should be something, or you should look a certain way, or you should like certain things, or, some of us, we get into a relationship with a man and then we think we need to behave a certain way, or whether that's, being a caretaker of the home or taking care of him in some way, or perhaps behaving a certain way sexually, and whether it's that we think we need to be a porn star, or we think we need to be proper and we can't actually share ourselves. My partner Mike, in an interview that I'll be sharing with you in the next 4 weeks or so that we did together for the podcast, talked about a book that I'd actually never heard of before called My Secret Garden by Nancy Friday. And I actually downloaded it almost immediately after and started reading it. And it's where she interviewed several women and received several anonymous letters over years, really years and years of researching this topic and delving into women's sexual fantasies, and found out that women, we just hold a lot of things in. There's a lot of things we don't think we should express or we think aren't normal. And, one of the beautiful things about having a community of women, whether it's online or offline, whether you work with a coach, you're in a small group, or you're in a women's circle, or perhaps it's a workout group or a mom's group or whatever it is, or maybe you're part of an association for women business owners, or they're like a certain professional organization around your career, or maybe you're involved in a church organization, whatever it is. One of the things that's so amazing about having community, or even just about having like sisters or girlfriends that you can trust, even if it's not a lot of people, even if it's only a handful of people, is being able to actually speak to what's true for you, what's really going on, and to start to work through and to get out some of these things that perhaps you have felt ashamed of in the past around being a woman. And so this is going to be a shorter episode for sure. The last thing I want to end on is this, is the idea as a woman. Oh, we live near a train, so I'm going to let that pass. It's super loud. A lot of the women who take my group programs or my coaching clients, they call that the train of truth because it's been in a lot of recordings. You've probably heard it in the background of some of the interviews because you never can tell when it's going to come through. And I certainly can't plan my life around the train schedule. But a lot of women have trouble using their voices. And in fact, like that's one of the most powerful things that you can tap into as a woman, and as the way you express your feminine is speaking your truth and saying what's true for you and allowing yourself to experience the full range of your emotions. And if you haven't listened to all of the interviews on the podcast, I highly encourage you to subscribe and to download and to listen to them, because one of the reasons why I even did the original Untamed the Wild Soul Woman interview series was to show women how many options there are for how to be a woman, how to be more feminine, and to realize that perhaps you don't even need to be more feminine. Perhaps you've been feminine all along, and it's just your unique expression that might not be like anyone else's that has caused you to think you're not feminine, because perhaps it's like less consistent or less apparent, or or less socially acceptable than perhaps you may have thought, or you may have seen, or you may have been raised around. And our culture really is changing. We're living in a really wild time in history, and a lot of people, like a lot of the women who I interview on this show, and in a lot of the questions that come up, are really calling us to constantly be questioning what's true for us, and if our judgments, if our behaviors, if our practices, if our habits, if our discernment points and our boundaries are based on things that are actually true for us, or they're coming from somewhere else. So I'm going to leave you on that note. There's a lot of inquiry to come and a lot more information in the next 2 episodes. So at any point, if you have a question that you would love for me to answer in a future Ask Liz, go ahead and email us at hello@wildsoulmovement.com. You'll be able to find the show notes for this episodes with links to any of the books or resources that I mentioned at wildsoulmovement.com/episode-12. And thank you so much for listening. If you're watching on video, I'll see you next time. And that's it. Talk to you later. Sometimes I think people are all or nothing, and they tell themselves, I'm all or nothing, instead of just giving themselves the opportunity. Well, no. So maybe you do work a 9 to 5, and all you could do is go outside and do a couple laps around your corporate office park at lunch, but you're still outside under the real sun instead of the halogen lights or whatever they are,
It's true. That actually was one of the heart habits that I transformed. I talk about habit transformation and how we are 40% of everything we do, think, say, eat is what we did yesterday. We are our habits.